Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. I'm really excited to talk again with my good friend and professional colleague Kirill. We've had lots of conversations because there's been so much activity in the last, I guess, I don't know, 40 days or whatever it's been that the administration has been changed to President Trump. There are so many things that we could talk about today, but we're going to try and focus on the major strategic tidbits that we think are important to talk about, and probably more importantly, what's behind some of the decisions that have been made, because a lot of people don't know what's going on behind the scenes. In our last episode, it was over an hour long, and if you got a chance to watch that, I really appreciate it. So does Kirill. We tried to put together some important information that you might find pertinent. However, to be completely open and transparent, there has been so much movement and speed in the last 30 days to 40 days that it almost seems like what we were talking about in the first episode is already, starting to feel old. That doesn't mean you shouldn't watch it, but it is leading to the strategy and the forward movement of what's happening in the States. So, Kirill, welcome again to another episode. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, John. Wonderful to have this conversation again. Um, and you're right. It was, I don't know, 2, 3 weeks, and it's moving at a huge pace, right? So, even before, for the audience, before we having conversation live, we were talking about a little bit about the meeting in the White House, and my point was that everything is moving so fast that maybe we shouldn't be talking about this meeting because we are right miles ahead of it. But John pointed out that probably we should, and I see why. A couple of points. The first, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation happening, and a lot of that is not intentional on people's side. It's just people don't hear a lot, and there's a lot of speculation. So I put together a little bit of a timeline and what was leading to the meeting, and I think that was important, right? John, we want to talk about that piece, right?
Well, absolutely. But I think, sometimes when there's a media spectacle of something like what happened in the Oval Office, people don't always realize or know that whatever happened before that meeting potentially caused that meeting. And then there's the outcome after the meeting. So all people might see is just what the news is reporting on the actual meeting itself. But yeah, I would love to
Mhm.
get your take on what happened. What do you think happened before that meeting that facilitated that kind of public spectacle? And what was the strategic purpose of creating something like that? And then where are we now? So there's sort of three timelines there.
Mhm. So here are my thoughts, right? Um, Before we go to the timeline, what happened before the meeting, I want to make sure that there's understanding that I am looking at information, but I'm looking at it critically, meaning that I don't take mass media or YouTube or whatever podcast at the face value. So I go to the real reporting, meaning that let's say Mark Rubio says something about what happened. Other people are involved as saying what happened, and then I take that and then I see what's happening because I don't have any reason to not to believe these players, right? So the thing that I think generally is happening before we go into the timeline is that strategically there's a shift in U.S. position, and everybody is concerned about it for different reasons. Uh, if you look at this, if you have a TDS as an example, then obviously Trump is a Russian agent, and then everything is explained from that perspective. The reality, I think, is that U.S. or Trump administration stated that they want to finish this war. And they also stated that they want to take a position as a mediator. And because want to take this position as a mediator, they need to move from the pro-Ukrainian position of the prior White House into the middle position. And it is easier said than done. First of all, obviously, there's a perception of moving position towards the Russian side because people are simply moving into the middle. Um, but the other problem is that Trump cannot move in the middle and completely dissociate himself from Ukraine because he wants to set the peace, right? And for that he needs to have a leverage, and for that he needs to have both parties at the balanced power between Russia and Ukraine. And immediately as he moves from pro-Ukrainian position of some support of Ukraine, Ukraine loses the leverage. So that way, he really, on the power balance, he favors the Russian side. And that's a problem for him. That's actually a tragic problem for everybody because he cannot dissociate himself with Ukraine. And I mean, in a very, I said, like I have a pro-Ukrainian position. So, but I also want this war to end, right? So because of that, there's a lot of confusion. I'll give you an example. Uh, Post the meeting, the U.S. administration wanted to exert leverage on Ukraine to move them to negotiation table. And what they did, they canceled, I believe, offensive intelligence gathering or sharing. I think the everybody reported that they canceled the intelligence sharing, but I don't believe they did. They just did offensive one. That means if Russians are shooting at Ukraine, Ukraine is still informed about it, right? But if Ukraine wants to launch something long distance, the U.S. is not providing them with that intelligence. Ukraine do that by themselves, which they did, but U.S. is not doing that. The second, there was a pause of 2, 3, or 4 days of military material, right? That was another thing. And the problem with that, Trump exerted leverage on Ukrainians, but made Ukrainian hand weaker. And for the short term, that was okay. Long term, he doesn't have that luxury because then he doesn't have this balance of power at negotiation table. Like I was able to explain why that is important, right? And everybody understand why balance of power is important. So despite of taking mediator position, really Trump administration continues to be and by default should be pro-Ukrainian. It's just not at the same level as Biden was before. And again, and I want to also make a point. The Biden pro-Ukrainian position was a little bit a hypercritical position because he was saying they were saying one thing, but they were not providing enough support, material support in reality.
Well, let's um let's just dissect some of what you just said, Kirill. And the balance of power is it's not the scales of justice that are, easy to balance. It's here or here, and sometimes you have to, adjust things in order to get what you want. What Trump wants, I believe, honestly, what Trump wants is for the war to end. But the way that he has approached this was really interesting for me from a strategic perspective because he called out President Zelensky first. Now, we don't know what's gone on behind the scenes, so I'm only going with what I've read and what I've seen. But that prompted, obviously, a response from pro-Ukrainian people, and obviously completely fair. But I'm really curious about how you feel about, and again, I don't want to belabor this point, but the Oval Office interview and whether that was public spectacle or whether it was strategic or both, number one. And then I'd love to know, Putin obviously saw that. So what do you think Putin is saying to himself when he sees Zelensky being called out in that kind of forum in the States? Or is he intelligent enough to understand the strategic ramifications of that and that this is the US trying to manipulate a scenario in order to get a desired outcome?
Right. So let me tell you why I don't think we know that. it's been reported for many years that Putin doesn't watch YouTube or whatever news, and he doesn't go internet, and he goes by the written reports provided by intelligence services. So now the whole meeting was 50 minutes long, and it started to be derailed at minute 3:56, I think, minute four, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, so did they provide the full report what was happening or not? Because if you look, one of the reasons why pro-Ukrainian people were so upset is because press was cutting and pasting the whole meeting, and they were concentrated on minute 30 or 40 or whatever it was, right? With this whole GD Vance interaction or whatever. But that was on the tail end of the conversation.
Mhm.
At that point of time, the reason why I think GD Vance reacted the way he did, because he's a smart guy. At that point of time, he thought everything is over now. And it was just delivering a punch at that point of time and taking, I guess it was pretty opportunistic because it didn't matter at that point of time, but he was able to score some political points for himself, really. So the reason why I'm saying this is and that was important what I said before, Trump is trying to get into the middle of mediation point, right? And we know that what Trump doesn't want to do, and he never wants to do that, when he's speaking to people that believe that he believes holding the cards, he never wants to upset them personally. It was the first 4 years, and now he doesn't call people names if he doesn't want to. He only calls names where he believes it's beneficial for him, right? And what was happening on minute four is Zelensky was trying to push Trump towards moral judgments and pushing him to express his opinion on what Putin done wrong and about all the evil things, right? And Trump didn't want to go there. It happened several times, and Trump was kind of pushing it aside less and less impatiently. And that's where it got into this conversation about him being a tough guy and he wants US on his side to be a tough guy. And that's where it was coming from, right? The reality is he wanted to pull Trump into this whole conversation. Now, I do not know, and I cannot make that judgment. Is Zelensky doing that on purpose strategically, or because as we spoke last time, in the last 2 3 years of the war, specifically going into Europe, where he is a hero and cannot do anything wrong, he's coming with the same attitude here and doesn't understand that this room is absolutely different,
Yeah.
right?
Why do you think, and that's really great, and it leads me to my next question. Why do you think Trump started the discussions with Ukraine and not with Putin first? And for no other reason than just Putin was the one that started the war. And people might argue, as we talked last time, he didn't really start the war. Yes, he invaded and whatever, but there was impetus for that to happen, and he's got all the justifications in the world. But why would Trump start with Zelensky first? Is it
Well,
because
in
is it
fact, he didn't
because
start with Zelensky first. He made a call to Putin first, right?
well, that's what he says, but
Hmm.
this is one of those what's going on behind the scenes that nobody has access to. So did he call Putin first and say, I want this war to end, where, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
yeah.
And then Putin says, well, in order for the war to end, I need the following thing.
No, no, that didn't. My understanding it didn't happen that way. There was a Trump was speaking about this one half-hour call, and the Russians were talking about the same thing. And I don't think it was really softening the ground call, right? There was no conversation of specifics, except probably and again, it's probably was conversation. Well, how do you feel about the war? A very general conversations. Um, and then he called Zelensky and had a briefer conversation. Um, we need to also remember that he's talking to Zelensky. He talked to Zelensky in New York, I think, a couple of months ago, right? Or 3 months or 4 months ago. There was a contact with Zelensky personally, and with Putin, he didn't talk since, I don't know, last 4 years, right? But if you think about it, well, when you do negotiations, right, and let's say you're mediating between parties, you first go to the party that is more connected to you, or with the party that you have who have more leverage to understand where they are, because it's easier, because you think it's easier to adjust their position, right? And then once you understand that full picture, you go to the party that is harder, right? And that's what I think he's doing. That's a very logical thing to do, right? Because he wants to be prepared for the Putin's meeting and
Right.
Putin's conversation, right?
And based on what we've heard so far, do you really believe, and this is just a feeling, not a, you know, hard fact, but do you really believe that Putin wants to end the war, or is he, sort of motivated and hell-bent on getting exactly what he wants? Because in most wars, there has to be a compromise. Even if it's complete annihilation, there is usually, I didn't get everything I wanted, and a lot of people got hurt. A lot of people got killed. Citizens are, being killed every single day and destroying complete country. But do you think that there is an opportunity here for this war to end through negotiation?
I think there is. I think it's maybe 40 or 50 or 60%, something like that. Very close to 50-50, but there is. And for listeners who listened to our first podcast, I said in the beginning that, as Clausewitz said, the war is just policy with different using different means, right?
Yeah.
So if Putin has the same objective as subjugation of Ukraine, and a lot of people sometimes confuse when I say subjugation of Ukraine, they think it's occupation of Ukraine. He doesn't necessarily need to occupy Ukraine, not at least whole of Ukraine. Like, he wants subjugation of Ukraine. I think maybe he will be good with the same position that he has over Belarus right now, potentially, right? Obviously, Ukraine is a more restless nation. It will be harder to control them versus Belarus. But
So, Kirill, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but if you're saying that it's possible that it's at the moment it's 50-50, what is the tipping point that you think is either going to get Zelensky rather on board or Putin on board? Because they both have to get on board for something here in order for the tipping point to happen. What
mhm.
do you think it is that could be the tipping point for each of them?
I think in order to understand that, I will advise users to, or users, I apologize, listeners to go and to have a brief reading on the end of the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, where Teddy Roosevelt brokered the peace, by the way, right? It was another Russian war that U.S. president brokered the peace. And if you look at what happened, is that uh, there was absolutely an asymmetrical decision. So what I mean is, it's not like, yeah, the Russians and Japanese stopped, or there was an exchange. There was completely exchange on everything. So the reparation exchange, some territory exchange. There was other exchanges that were happening completely. Some seemed to be out of the blue. You would not think about it prior to the conversation, meaning the peace conversation. I think everybody forgets that US being the mediator, but they're also involved. And Russia has different interests. It's not necessarily about moving that line, right? If Russia can get something out of US on the global trade, or access to certain things, or uh, the sanctions will go down, or the 300 billion that's sitting in the European banks are going to be released. This could change everything. We shouldn't People shouldn't be looking at it as a zero-sum game at all. It could be completely out of the blue from many people's perspective, but US has a major leverage from that perspective, right?
How can we balance the this idea of America first and what Trump is doing to basically turn all the money funnels around to face the US and reclaim all of this these tariffs, and he's made statements that the US has been taken advantage of for so long. How can we reconcile that with Putin saying, okay, I'll end the war, but you have to do this for me? How do you think that's going to play out with Trump, where it's America first? And in this
Yeah, but
particular
America
case,
first doesn't mean America's stupid, though, right?
oh no, no, that's I'm not insinuating that. It's just it is an ideal that he has run through his entire cabinet, and everybody that talks in front of the news talks about America first, America first, America first. Well, if sanctions come down, that means that America is not getting as much money, and uh, Russia is going to be trading in a different way. It gives them more power. That's not exactly the what they want.
I know, I understand what we're talking about. Let me give you an example, right? So this so-called mineral deal, which is really economic fund of reconstruction of Ukraine, that's what it is, right?
Yeah,
And US is the best country from the building infrastructure perspective, an infrastructure project of massive scale, right? Halliburton could build half of Ukraine in 10 years if funds will be provided, as an example. And these are major, major contractors. So before that came about, nobody thought about it, right? But now all of a sudden there's American vested interest and potential future revenue and profit flow.
yeah,
So there's no reason to not to believe that the Americans will come up with the same idea that will satisfy their needs and provide some benefit for Putin, and it will still be beneficial for US economically.
yeah,
Well, I'll give you an example. During the, well, so we're Canadian, so majority of, maybe not majority, but significant percentage of grain into Soviet Union during last 20 years of the Soviet Union was coming from North America, right? So it was major economic benefit from North America, yet USSR was the mortal enemy. So reconcile that, right?
well, sure. And I totally agree with you on that, but there's a big difference between trade agreements, which is just products moving from here to there and being taxed and paid for, versus invading a sovereign country, and human lives have been lost. So sure, the US could come to the table and say, we want this war to end, and Putin could say, good for you. For me, it could just keep going until I get what I want. Okay, well, what do you want? Well, now there's a discussion about what does he want and can we get there? And what I find interesting at the moment is that Trump, in the way that he's approached this so far, was fascinating for me because, and again, we don't know the backstory, but he started with publicly anyway. He started with Zelensky. We haven't seen a meeting yet publicly with Putin where Trump is, saying you're a bully and you should really stop doing this, because
Now,
that
he's not going to do that, though.
I know that. No, 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 I know that. That's what I'm saying. So it's the way it's being presented to the public has, you know, uh, opens the door for interpretation of what he's trying to do. And although the whole administration is saying they're pro-Ukraine, calling out Zelensky in public had a very interesting. I won't speak for everybody, but when I watched it, I thought, wow, that's the first time I've seen Zelensky actually called out
Mhm.
on the cameras. Biden was nowhere. I don't know what he was doing, but it seemed to just be ship the weapons and send them the aid, and that's fine. But um, I think Putin is smart enough. I don't know if you agree, but I think Putin is shrewd, and I think he's intellectual. I think he's strategic. Um, but
You
I
cannot
also
stay in power for 25 years, right? Without being strategic.
exactly, exactly. I was just going to say that. So. he knows, and I believe he saw, whether he was briefed by intel groups or not, I think he's aware of that conversation with Zelensky and the fact that Trump is smarter than I think sometimes people give him credit for. Because in this particular case, if he makes it seem in any way like Zelensky maybe is um, playing the victim card, which he has a right to do. It's not necessarily strategic, but he has a right to do. Putin might be more interested in engaging in a conversation and a negotiation with the United States. How do you react to that?
I don't know. For me, it, it- for me, it's much more easier, right? The Trump is really he is transactional. He likes to be transactional. He believes in transactional approach. He doesn't like multilateral agreements. He like bilateral agreements. So it's really fast moves that he does, and then he is extremely flexible and he adjusts on the fly. So what you're trying to kind of put together is a kind of an elaborate strategic web of choices, which in fact that might be in back of his mind, but it's not in front of his mind. In front of his mind, he has this approach that is really straightforward here, right? And that's why it's so brutal for the public because instead of playing these diplomatic games, he just goes and does it publicly and directly. So there's no reason for me, I believe, at least for me, to explain it in very elaborate terms. Like I will give you like I put some timeline right here, what happened, what led to this meeting. So 12th of February, when was the meeting, by the way? It was like probably 19th or something like that, 18th of February. Everything is
I
so
think
fast.
so, yeah.
So a week before the meeting, only a week before the meeting, was something like that. Trump called Putin and Zelensky, and Zelensky at the same time got the first draft of the mineral deal, right? Uh, and then when the Trump envoy came to Kiev, because the assumption was they're going to push them to sign, it seems, and this is pure speculation, that Ukrainians didn't know what to do, is Zelensky didn't show up for the meeting. So I believe the justification was he was overslept because he was working all night because of the war. So if that reporting is correct, probably he didn't know what to do. It was really so fast they couldn't make that decision,
Yeah.
right? And that's where this conversation about lack of respect came about. It's like I'm sending the envoy, you're sleeping, all kind of stuff like that, right? Then 13, 14, Zelensky publicly stated the displeasure with Trump making the first call to Putin. And the statements that he was making, he didn't say like, oh, he preferred if Trump called him first. No, it was really displeasure. So Trump doesn't like any of those things, really, right? So it was not a smart move on Zelensky's part unless he actually wanted to provoke that reaction. Then on 14, Zelensky refused to sign the second draft. Agreement is not signed, by the way, today. Still not signed today, right? And
Wait,
and
wait,
this
Kirill,
is
sorry, Kirill, are you referring to the minerals deal?
yeah, to the
I
minerals deal.
thought I thought that the overwhelming support of the Ukraine government had already agreed to it. It just required Zelensky.
It's not,
Zelensky's.
yes, but it's not signed,
Oh, okay,
right?
so it's agreed to in principle, but until he signs it, it's not in,
Yeah.
enact.
And there's a reason, there should be a reason why they're not signing it, right?
Yes. Well,
Otherwise,
if it only takes his signature and then he has that visit. So sorry, go back to your timeline. I
yeah.
just wanted to double check that because the last reports that I saw and heard and everything is moving in 24
It
hours.
seems like, yeah, the things are moving in a positive direction, but he still hasn't signed it,
Yeah.
right? So the 14th, when I said he refused to sign this mineral deal, he did it publicly in the Munich conference, right? into U.S. Treasury face, Secretary of Treasury face. Then on 18th, remember this whole dictator tweet and things of that nature.
Yes.
So it was a reaction a day later or several hours later after Zelensky said that Trump is living in the Russian propaganda bubble. So he insulted him first.
Not a smart move.
Right. So he started his first and he got an insult back. Right. And we know that Trump just, there's no limit to insults. So, well, he went to like completely nuclear, right? And then, even when press was asking him this question, why did you call him a dictator? And Trump said, I really called him that. Next question, right? So that was that. So we had this escalation on the public side, and then he's going into White House Oval Office, right, and having these conversations. So it was already kind of hot. And what they were, and then when he was pulling Trump on his side, I think what was happening is Trump understood that, I don't know, is it true or not, but he understood that Zelensky is not ready to have negotiations, right? And that's what really ticked him off.
Yeah. That's when I found it funny when Trump was running for office and part of his campaign was, I'll have the war done in 24 hours and whatever. I know that we talked about this in our last meeting. We don't have to rehash it, but nobody really believed that. But it seemed he was absolutely committed to changing the dynamic and ending the war. I really believe that there is an opportunity here for this to happen, but there are so many diplomatic and policy related issues that need to happen that it could be another 6 months to a year before anybody signs or agrees to anything. In the meantime, the war is just going to continue. The latest thing that I heard about was that Zelensky agreed to a ceasefire.
Yes, it happened in Saudi Arabia in the meeting. Well,
Yes,
the delegation and then Zelensky confirmed that, right? Because
yes.
he was not at that table.
So I wanted to get your take on that because from my understanding, it was only a 30-day ceasefire.
That's a long ceasefire. That's a very long ceasefire for the first ceasefire.
Of course, yeah. But which Zelensky was very quick to point out, what's the point in agreeing to a ceasefire? The Russians never honor that anyway.
Right.
And so the Russians also have to agree to a ceasefire.
Correct.
So negotiating that with only one side and the other side is still shooting is kind
No,
of,
but they did negotiate it, right? The US delegation proposed it. They accepted it. Now that they went to Putin, the US envoy is right now in Moscow having these conversations, right?
yeah, but it's already been almost a week since the ceasefire was agreed to. So it's a 30-day ceasefire is a long time, as you pointed out. But the ceasefire, I'm assuming, doesn't really start until both sides agree
Yes,
to.
correct.
Right.
Correct.
It's like
Correct.
a mutual agreed deadline of, okay, the ceasefire will start on this date.
Hmm.
Now, what I'm curious to know from you and your opinion is what is, well, I know what the purpose of a ceasefire is. I think everybody that's listening or watching this knows, but what do you think can happen based on the speed that Trump moves at the moment? What do you think can happen in the 30 days? Is it simply a reprieve from all-out war, or is it the opportunity to really start to negotiate properly about the end of the war? Because sometimes people agree to, not people, countries agree to a ceasefire because it's just a reprieve from war. In the meantime, they're ramping up again to go back at it in 30 days from now if nothing changes.
And that's why Ukrainians didn't want the ceasefire 6 months ago, a year ago, because that was their concern, that the Russians will regroup and then they will attack again. The problem right now is that the Russians have the momentum. So the ceasefire benefit Ukrainian side more. So Putin needs to agree with that because he is on the winning side right now. It's very slow and grinding, but it's still he is pushing. So the situation changed, right? Because then the war situation changed. So back to your point. Yesterday, Trump was meeting with Irish Prime Minister, and in usual 40, 50-minute conversation, friendly conversation with the nice green socks and green ties, right? That's Irish in the United States. Trump said that they're not wasting any time, and as they're preparing for the ceasefire, hopefully it's going to happen, they already have a framework in place of what they're going to have a conversation about as far as the peace negotiations. Um, the reason, and that's not surprising, is because I don't know, did you had a chance to listen and or view General Kellogg? Uh, it's not a press conference. This was rather a General Kellogg talk where he actually said that they got a deal sheet from Russians, but they didn't have it from Ukrainians a week ago before and that's why this part of the kerfuffle that was happening in the White House, and that's why the push was after that. They
Right.
needed to see the deals, the conditions sheet from Ukrainians, right, for conditions of negotiations. It seems like they got it at the in Saudi Arabia, right, and they already have it from Russian side, so they can sit down and look at their options as far as mediation goes.
How encouraged are you that for the first time there are diplomatic relations, there are policy changes, there are conversations happening that are everything I've seen, it's really the US that's leading the negotiation process. Um, how do you feel about the fact that that's the first time that's happening in now 3+ years of the war, number one? And number two, why have none of the European countries um, been able to facilitate anything like this? Is it about economic power? Is it about military power or nuclear power? How do you respond to that?
So first of all, I'm very encouraged. I really hope that 2025, and we had a conversation, and I said in December after November after election, that there's a hope that this could come to an end, right? And again, I think I am clear-eyed on this. Putin can say no. I don't think he will say no to initially. He would say no at the end because strategically for him. Can I say something before I answer your question?
Sure.
Remember in the first podcast, I was telling about what was happening with Minsk agreements,
Yes.
and then the Ukrainians were forced to sign it pretty much because they want to stop the killing of their forces. So there was a major envelope happening, and Ukrainian forces were surrounded, and they were surrounded already. So and the Russians were killing them. Um, and Putin waited several days to sign the Minsk Accord because the whole idea of Minsk Accord was signed, it should be stopping of killing, right? So he waited several days or 2 days or 3 days until that was complete. Yeah, until Ukrainians surrendered, whoever was left alive was surrendered,
Yeah.
right? So right now there's a Kursk operation. And because of that, the Russians are pushing Ukrainians out of the Russia territory proper. And Putin potentially has has motivation to prolong this, saying yes to the ceasefire for two reasons. First of all, he wants to appear tough, right? So there's no point of him saying yes immediately. taking time is good. And he doesn't necessarily need to agree to this 30 days of ceasefire. He could agree to 20, right? Just as a matter of negotiation position. And by doing that, he will buy time in hope that the Russian forces push Ukrainians out,
Right.
right? So I answered, I guess, the hope question. I interjected with this point. Now, the other point about why Europeans cannot do it. Well, I don't want to be condescending to Europeans, but before
But I
the
sense
second,
that you're about to anyway.
yeah, exactly. So so before the Second World War, we had these great powers, right? Soviet Union was not a great power. Russian Empire was. Soviet Union was not. It became great power after the Second World War. But you had the French and the Germans and the British, and they had massive armies. They were not afraid of using them. Um, Germans specifically, as we all know. And what happened after the Second World War is that this whole NATO establishment was for two reasons. The first reason was to neuter. First is obviously collective defense against the Soviet Union, but the second is to neuter Germany. Literally, they wanted to ensure that after the two world wars, that the third one, Germany, is not going to instigate the third one, and they managed to do that. And then on top of that, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a peace dividend. And everybody was just getting rid of the armies and spend. And also the public sentiment became really, um, I would say, pacifist in Europe. So if you have countries that are pacifists, and Germany is a great example. They're like completely pacifist country. There was what is it called? There was a poll made before the Ukrainian war, and the question was, will you defend your country? Is it going to be attacked? I think 37% of Germans say they wouldn't, which obviously, like sometimes these things happen and then countries attack and people rise up. But can you imagine, like before the First World War, before the Second World War, that you will have more than 5% population of Germany that would say they wouldn't fight, right? So you lost leverage on the military side, right? They couldn't send enough tanks because they don't have their own tanks anymore, really. So they don't have any significant production capability of military equipment. US has problems, and now they're trying to fix it, right? Europe is planning to fix it, but they don't have even half of capacity which US has. And there's 400 million Europeans, right?
Yeah.
So there's no will to fight, there's nothing to fight with. Uh, they they lost all credibility with Minsk or of Minsk Accords. It was really the same people who today were saying, "Well, we need to support Ukraine." They were trying to strong arm Ukraine, like the German president was trying to strong arm Ukraine in 23, I think, to accept the Minsk Accord to execute them, right? Which would have meant subjugation of Ukraine,
Yeah.
right? So I guess the answer to that, they don't have military capacity, they don't have credibility from perspective of using leverage, they don't have leverage. Well, they're planning to build that, but I mean that's good. That Trump wants that, right?
Sure. Well, yeah, because that actually gives him leverage if he's the one that walks into the room and says, okay, everybody start getting along and let's come to some kind of agreement because this has to end. And we want to be the people that bring it to that point.
Mhm. Yeah. Did it answer your question?
Yes. Yeah. No, I just, it's just interesting for me that all of the policies, all of the borders, we had to wait for Trump to become president again because none of these conversations were happening when Biden was president. And or at least the actions. Maybe the conversations were happening, but maybe the actions
No,
did.
the conversations were also happening because look, his foreign policy advisor, right, Jack Sullivan, right, was this whole management of de-escalation, escalation management thing. Uh, they were not pushing Europe really for more spend. They might be telling that, but I mean, okay, so somebody tells you to spend more on this versus that. Why would I listen, right? So
Yeah, there's no motivation behind that. Well, I'm very encouraged by the conversations that are happening. Um,
it's nerve-wracking though, right?
it's nerve-wracking because and they're moving at such a pace that it almost seems like every day, you get another tidbit of information, and that's just the stuff that's getting actually reported to the mainstream media and the press. But there's clearly a lot of discussions that are happening in the background. I mean, you and I talked about this at the end of the last podcast we did, and now in this one, we could do one of these every day if, we were like
Oh,
a news
please
channel or
spare me. Please spare me. I will have a nervous breakdown.
something. It's just it's moving so quickly, and but I honestly believe it's moving very quickly in a positive direction. I feel like the fact that a ceasefire agreement, excuse me, a ceasefire agreement is even being
Is
talked about.
on the table. Is on the table, right?
Yeah,
It's not signed and agreed, but it's on the table now.
exactly. So the fact that that's even on the table means that Trump's administration has put in the effort to at least try and bring these two people, these two nations, these two leaders to a negotiation table and say, okay, what needs to happen here and for everybody to just stop shooting people. And
Hmm.
I know that's a very highly oversimplified version of what war is, but um, there's really great reasons for it to stop. But I also think both leaders think that there's also reasons why it should continue because neither of them are getting what they want yet.
Correct.
So that's the point of process of negotiation. It's
Right.
not so much compromise, it's just what is it that you need to stop doing this and what is it that you need to move on and stop doing the same thing because as soon as you're in war, there are two fighters.
Right. But there's also should be understanding that this war is not the end of it, though, right? I mean, it may be the end of the shooting war, but the underlying conflict is still there, right? Is it's Putin is not going to wake up tomorrow and said he doesn't want subjugation of Ukraine,
Okay, so
right?
that's a really great point. So let's talk about that. Let's pretend tomorrow Trump is successful at getting both parties to agree to a ceasefire for the time being. He buys himself some negotiating time. They negotiate an end to the war.
Hmm.
What is your feeling? Because you mentioned this in the last episode, and you also mentioned it again now, even before we started this particular episode. Um, the end of this particular war is what you keep saying, which
Hmm.
means you're kind of leading people along to think maybe this part of this war is done, but it's likely or possible, not likely, it's possible that there's another one because the conflict is still not done.
Right. So yeah, I don't want people to think that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying, the conflict is not done, but this could be the last war, right? Because Putin has other means to try to achieve to what he's trying to achieve. And Ukraine also has an ability to resist that. The
And what,
challenge for Ukrainians.
Kirill, what do you mean by that when you say that?
So uh, for me, for anybody who knows like Eastern Slavs or who knows what's happening in the former Soviet Union will understand it without saying. As an example, will be Belarus, right? Belarus is a client state that even part of the forces moving to Kiev were coming from Belarus, right? The ground forces.
Yeah.
And the president of Belarus had no say in that. He literally had a call with Zelensky that was in Lex's interview, and he almost apologized and he said he's not in control, right?
Right.
Uh, so he has limited sovereignty, like really, really limited. And uh, and that's what Putin might want to achieve. And Ukrainians will need to resist that. But I like in the war where it's all on the surface and people are fighting and dying, but everybody understand what they're dying for. This could be the next 5, 6, 10 years, and it could be beneath the surface, and it could be through political process.
Do you think there's any part of Zelensky that, regardless of whether he's in power or not, but is there obviously there's distrust on from the Russian side, or sorry, from the Ukrainian side versus the Russians. Is there any part of Zelensky that knows, really understands what you just said and thinks, look, what is the point of, coming to a ceasefire? What is the point of trying to negotiate a settlement? Because the second we sign it, tomorrow we're going to be, attacked in some other way again. Like there's so much unrest in what Russia's capable of doing, and who knows what the grand scheme of things is for Russia and what they're trying to do, what Putin is trying to do. But is it possible that that's creating some, discontent or some mistrust and consternation on the part of the Ukrainians?
Well, people talk about mistrust, and I still don't understand what people are talking about. I mean, there's a war, there's mistrust. It's just nobody trusts anybody, and neither they should.
Right.
So people say you cannot make an agreement with Putin because you cannot trust him. Duh, you cannot trust him, but you still can make an agreement, and that agreement could be solid because of two reasons. First, it could be in Russian interest. Two, and second of all, there could be a deterrent that prevents them from breaching the agreement, right? You don't need to trust anybody. Zelensky wouldn't trust Putin. Why would anybody trust Putin? Putin has a very clear objective, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
What I think the challenge is Ukrainians understand that fighting the war is defending their country. And let me give you a scenario. Let's say the war finishes and or ends. There's ceasefire and there will be elections 6, 10 months, 12 months after the peace settlement is reached and everything is quiet. And then there will be elections, right? During the elections, what's going to happen? Everybody will be pointing fingers at each other, right? There will be corruption allegations because there was a massive amount of money moving back and forward. And even if only 1% of the money was stolen, right, or misappropriated, there will still be a lot of finger pointing, right? So people will be unhappy with how the war concluded because the army sometimes wants to fight, despite of the political class wants that fight to stop. So people want revenge, people want justice because Ukraine would not have justice. That's very clear, right? If the war is going to stop, there will be no justice per se.
Yeah.
Because justice for Ukraine is pushing Russians towards the border. And that's not going to, and then getting reparations. And none of that's going to happen. So you will have all this finger pointing, and we don't know how that political unrest unravels. And there could be a major division in the country in a couple of years after that.
Yeah.
And Putin is going to exploit it. That's like a given.
Yeah. So it's possible that the end of the war is the end of phase one of the war.
It's the end of phase four already.
Sure. Sure. Let's go with that. I mean, all that, the only reason I'm saying that is it implies that there are more phases to come.
Yes,
So, Kirill, the last thing I wanted to ask you about, because I thought the minerals deal,
that's
that,
funny. That's so Trump. Like
I
simple,
know,
something like very simple name, right?
I know, but I thought that was really funny, but also very strategic in a sneaky way because if Zelensky agrees to the mineral deal, Trump gets some of the money back that he apparently, but not apparently, that the US has given to Ukraine in terms of weapons and supplies and that sort
Mhm.
of thing. But it also means that American companies would
We'll be
be,
digging. We'll be digging, as Trump said. We'll be
yes,
there digging.
yes,
Yeah.
in Ukraine. Now, if that happens, that does change the dynamic if there is a phase five to the war, because now Americans are on Ukrainian soil.
Right. But that wouldn't help if it's a political takeover. It only helps if it's a military takeover,
Yes.
right?
Yes. So do you
Because the
think,
Brits were doing that. Brits were doing that. They have these concessions and they were all like Hong Kong example. China is all around, but Hong Kong is protected. You know, people are digging 5 kilometers out. There's a wall, and they're digging.
so do you think phase five is potentially, assuming phase four comes to an end, do you think phase five is more of a political domination type of
Attempt
strategy?
attempt of political coercion. That will be the right word, not
Right.
domination. He
Okay.
will try to coerce them, and then, if that's a succeed, he will dominate them.
Right.
Right?
Well, you and I talked about, actually, that's a really interesting point because you're talking about phase four happening now, and phase four is military, attack. But some of the other phases he tried were political, by having,
One of the phases was it's this is a second military phase, right? Because
yes,
it's continuation war. But there was two political one between the two wars and prior to the first one.
right. And you and I talked about this in our first episode where we were talking about the fact that Putin tried the political approach preemptively, and it didn't have the effect exactly that he wanted it to. And now we're at the full-blown military force, war. And now maybe once he, destroys a huge part of Ukraine, maybe now it's easier for him to go in and start exercising some kind of coercion in a political sense.
Yeah, maybe, maybe not, right? There's other thing which people remember. I was telling you in the beginning that U.S. can give Ukraine, sorry, the Russia something beyond Ukraine conversation, right? Which is increasing the pie and give Russians more interested in settlement because they will have this peace. There's other peace too, right? Do you see the kerfuffle that's happening right now? Europeans are upset at Trump, NATO, and things. And it's bizarre because if you look at the Secretary General, he was in the White House pretty happy. Well, because he's like increase of budgets and military spend, and he's very optimistic. Trump is being optimistic because well, they're spending more, they're more powerful now, and then Europeans, left, specifically left and center, is running that U.S. left alliance, and there's no nuclear shield. It's like what? Yeah, so it's like parallel universe, right?
Right.
But it's beneficial for Putin too, because Europeans are at least publicly left NATO. It's not Trump left NATO, it's them left NATO, right? Because
Yeah.
there's no protection, and they're trying to get together to try this European force. And then even Chancellor of Germany was saying, well, we want our nuclear force or whatever. And then 2 days later, after having these meetings, he realized that's not going to happen. And then he said, yeah, but we also want US nuclear. So we want this and we want that and the other, right?
Well, that to be honest with you, I think a lot of European countries have gotten away with, and I think that's what Trump's frustration is about, and it's part of the America First,
Yeah.
kind of policy because he said, how many countries do we need to take care of and pay for here before somebody steps up and says, we can take care of ourselves. Thank you very much. Let's partner together. Because a
Mhm.
lot of these countries are just taking advantage of the United States. And it's been going on for a really long time.
Right, right. And at least we Canadians, we have an excuse. We have geography, right? So, I mean, who's going to be shooting at us because they could miss and hit United States. So so
Exactly.
US is kind of forced to protect us, even if we're not paying anything much,
Yes.
right? What is Europeans' excuse?
They don't have one. But that was the one of the purposes of NATO, right? Everybody contributes a certain amount and everybody takes care of each other so that if somebody gets attacked, somebody else will help. Well,
Well, not somebody else, everybody will.
well,
This whole
sure.
idea, right?
Right,
Everybody.
but if you're not building up your military capacity, then you're letting down your partner. So I don't know, we're going to see, but I'm very interested in the fact that Trump is basically going after everybody, including Canadians.
Yeah, yeah. But you see, he's not going hard at us on the military spend, right?
No,
Because yeah, because first of all, we're small, right? Because he's thinking 500 million people there, like increase of GDP by 2% on the span is a lot of money. And if we are here small and we increase from 1.8 to 3.5, it's not going to give him much,
yeah,
right?
yeah, no,
But he's going to talk about it anyhow.
of course he is. He talks about everything, and you sometimes you have no idea what he's talking about, but there's definitely a different Trump this time than the first time around. I found the first time around he spent more time in the sort of buffoonery lane where, everything he said, you were just like, oh God, did he really say that? What, that's not presidential. And now he has an agenda, he has a plan, he surrounded himself with some really, really good team members that are just, he hit the ground running. He was already, my understanding is that they were all in, every time he announced somebody had been appointed, that they were in Mar-a-Lago and already planning this. Look, day one, I want these 50 things done. You have 10, you have 10, you have 10, and you have 10.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's just moving at a speed that is
Yeah,
honestly really fun
the
to watch.
only the only the only issue that I have, Joan, with all this is the whole idea. They elected him the first time and partly the second time because he's a disruptor, right?
Yeah.
Well, they want the disruption of the whole way of U.S. government goes around things and the policies. Well, the challenge is that because he's so disruptive, he can disrupt. He's disrupting himself all the time too,
Yeah.
right?
No, it's been fun to watch so far, and like I said, you and I could talk pretty much every day, even if well, we said this one's going to be shorter. It's still it's over. It's already been over an hour again, but that's fine because I love talking to you about this stuff. So we should definitely plan to do this again. Is there
Mhm.
anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to make sure that we cover before we close off this episode?
So I will advise the viewers and listeners to stop hyperventilating, even if they don't distrust or hate Trump, because so far what he was trying to achieve is to get people to the table from the first stage of negotiation happened. Ukraine is still receiving military aid and intelligence. Uh, the Russians are right now confused, probably what to do next. At least they need to think about it, which means it's not an easy decision, which we want them to be that way, right? Because we want good decisions that will last.
Mhm.
Um, so the Europeans are getting serious and finding €1 trillion to whatever the money is. I will start calling gazillion dollars to put together in defense. It seems that Panama Channel conundrum is resolved too a couple of days ago. You've heard, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, so at least that's, I mean, we had a conversation if Trump likes to throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks. I mean, if he's throwing three things like Greenland and 51st state, funny thing, and Panama, at least one is resolved, then that's not bad at all.
Sure.
Hey, well, the other thing I want to ask, anybody knows, is Doug Ford going to put bourbon back or whatever? Because it's like taking on the shelf, off the shelf, like electricity on, electricity off. Because oh, one of the things, speaking about bourbon, I just remember when I was driving, I thought Doug was funny because when he was campaigning the first time, remember the Baca beer thingy?
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
Right? It was big on campaign. It didn't happen, but it was big. And now the first reaction towards tariffs is taking care of liquor. There's something Freudian happening here on the liquor side that people
There's
need to
definitely
remember.
something happening. I'm not sure I know what it is, but that's that was interesting. What was what I didn't like about actually now that you mentioned Doug Ford, and for those that are listening or watching, Doug Ford is the Premier of Ontario. It's a province in Canada, and Ontario supplies three major states of northern United States. I think it's Michigan, Minnesota and New York with electricity, and he was threatening to basically pull the plug because of these tariffs. And it seemed like there was one conversation within 4 hours from Trump, and Trump was announcing, I talked to him, he's a good guy, he's a strong guy, he was a gentleman, and he's not turning anything off. So I thought, wow, what a position to take. You overshoot the runway, and then now you're trying to drive back. It was just kind of funny. It made us made the premier, I think, look a little bit weak in that scenario.
Yeah, well, and people asking me, what about the bourbon? And I was said, oh, he shouldn't be putting it on the shelf because, like, first time he put on the shelf, off the shelf. Now he's going to off the shelf, on the shelf again. And the 2nd of April, he's going to do it again. He'll look silly.
Yeah. Yeah, because it looks like a knee-jerk reaction to everything that's happening. And what I think people don't realize is that Trump makes these decisions, but it's part of a longer term game. He's doing it now. It's kind of like hitting somebody over the head and then stepping back and saying, "Okay, how do you feel?" You know, it's the perspective, right? You're just going, "Okay, so you got hit in the head and you're bleeding. Now let's just have a conversation." And
Yeah.
it's all about perspective, but people are reacting I think the one thing I definitely feel is that people take Trump seriously. So when he says he's going to do something, he does do it, but he might
This
do it in a
time,
different way.
seriously, this time around.
Yes, yes. No, last time I don't know what he was doing and what he was saying, but some of it happened and some of it didn't. But um, anyway, Kirill, why don't we close off this version of
Mhm.
the podcast. And for anybody that enjoyed this that hasn't seen the first one, please check out the first one. It was just a few weeks ago, but it was highly relevant and important in the conversations that Kirill and I had. And would love it if you guys could check out this one. And there's more coming in the future because news is changing very, very quickly. And Kirill and I are always happy to talk about this and
And
come up with
please
conversations.
make comments in the comments section.
Yeah,
We
we
would
would
love
love to hear
that.
from you. Good, bad, ugly, just free speech. Let us know what you think and how you feel about it.